Part 3. Lower Fire Month, 9th Month, Day 3, 10:27. On his way back to the palace, Klein was lost in thought as he moved his feet. In his head, he thought of the bout with Gazef and repeatedly imagined how the fight could have gone better. As he was deciding which moves to try if he were to get another chance, a shout rang out. A crowd had gathered nearby. 2 soldiers stood next to them and awkwardly looked on. Rowdy voices could be heard from the center of the crowd. By the sound, it did not bode well. Klein's face hardened as he approached the soldiers. "What are you 2 doing?" From the sudden voice coming from behind them, the soldiers turned around and looked at Klein in surprise. They were equipped with a chain shirt and spear. They wore a surcoat bearing the kingdom's coat of arms over their chain shirts. Although they were the standard equipment for a guard, these 2 did not seem to be very well trained. For starters, their bodies seemed out of shape. They were not cleanly shaven, and their chain shirts were poorly maintained and appeared dirty. As a whole, they gave off the air of a lack of discipline. "Who the—" Seeing Klein, who was younger than him, speak to him out of the blue, the guard spoke in a confused voice with a hint of irritation. "I'm off duty." As Klein spoke firmly, the confusion that was in the guard's voice spread to his face. This boy who was younger than they were, speaking to them as if he was their superior. As if they judged that it would be wiser to be humble, the guards straightened their backs. "We think there's been some sort of a commotion." Klein suppressed the urge to reprimand them, that so much was obvious. Unlike the soldiers stationed in the palace, the guards who patrolled the surroundings were drawn from the common folk, and did not receive much training. In other words, they were like civilians who learned how to swing a sword. He turned his eyes away from the awkward guards and towards the crowd. Rather than relying on these 2, it would be faster to act. Although he might be overstepping his authority and interfering with the work of the patrols, if he were to ignore a citizen in need, then he would not be able to show his face to his benevolent master. "You guys wait here." Without waiting for a reply, Klein tried to force his way through the crowd. Although there was some space, he could not pass through. If anyone could pass through, that would be strange enough. While he was trying to force his way in, even though he was being pushed back, Klein heard a voice.
"Get out of my sight."
"What?"
"I will tell you one more time. Get out of my sight."
"You bastard!" This was bad. They were about to strike the old man. Klein's face was dyed red as he desperately tried to push his way inside. What entered his vision was the appearance of an old man and the men surrounding him. A ragged boy lay at the feet of the men. The neatly dressed old man gave off an elegance that made him seem like nobility, or someone who served nobility. Each of the men surrounding him had a rough appearance and seemed to be drunk. It was obvious which side was in the wrong. The largest among the men made a fist. When comparing him and the old man, the difference was overwhelming. The girth of their bodies, size of their muscles, the violent temperament that did not hesitate to spill blood. If he were to strike him, the old man would easily be sent flying. The people around them, who realized this, imagined the tragedy that was about to unfold for the old man and let out a small scream. However, Klein, who was in the middle of the crowd, felt a sense of danger. Without a doubt, the side with the men appeared tougher, but instead he felt as if the old man was giving off the atmosphere of absolute strength. That moment of absent-mindedness cost Klein the chance to stop the man's violence. He raised his fist and collapsed. Voices filled with surprise came from Klein's surroundings. The old man had accurately struck the man's chin. Not only that, he did so with incredible speed. It was so quick that someone like Klein, who trained their dynamic vision, could only barely catch it.
"Will you continue?"
Composure and a skill you could not tell from his outer appearance. Combined, they had no trouble sobering up the men from their drunken stupor. Even the onlookers were becoming ensnared by the old man's energy. The men completely lost their will to fight. "No, it was our fault." As they retreated back a few steps while apologizing in unison, the men grabbed their leader and fled. Klein had no intention of chasing after them. As if his heart had been stolen away by the old man with the straight back, Climb could not move. A posture that was as straight as a sword, it was an appearance that any warrior would long for. The old man touched the boy's back, as if to check his condition. He then asked a person nearby to treat him and moved on. The crowd parted in a straight line to make way for the old man. No one could tear their eyes away from his back, an appearance that commanded nothing less. Climb quickly ran to the collapsed boy and took out the potion that he had received from Gazef during training. "Can you drink?" There was no reply. He was completely unconscious. Climb opened the lid and poured the contents over the boy's body. Although it was easy to think of potions as medicines to drink, there was no problem with pouring it over the body. That was the greatness of magic. The potion seeped into the boy's body, as if his skin was absorbing the fluid. Seeing that the boy's complexion regained its color, Climb felt relieved and nodded his head. The surrounding people saw Climb use an expensive item like a potion, and were just as surprised as they were with the old man's skill. However, needless to say, Climb did not regret it. As long as citizens paid taxes, it was the duty of those who lived off those taxes to protect them and ensure their safety. Since he had not been able to fulfill this duty, Climb felt he had to do at least this much. Although the potion ought to ensure that there would be no more problems with the boy, it would be better to take him to the temple just in case. Climb signaled to the guards that he had on standby. It seemed they called for more. The 2 guards had been joined by 3 more men. The surrounding people looked at the guards that were arriving only just now with reproach. The guards looked nervous as Climb spoke to one of the men. "Take this child to the temple."
"What happened here exactly?"
"There was violence. I used a healing potion so there wouldn't be any problems, but take him just in case."
"Yes, understood."
Leaving the guards to finish up, Climb judged that there would be nothing more for him to do. Nothing good would come of a soldier who worked in the palace meddling any further in the work of others. "I assume you can find out what happened here from a witness who saw it from the beginning."
"Yes, I'll do that."
Having received their orders, the guards found their confidence and quickly moved out. Climb then stood up and ran, ignoring the voices of the guards asking where he was going. Arriving at the bend in the road where the old man had turned, Climb slowed his pace. He then followed him. His eyes fell on the old man's back, walking ahead of him. Although he wanted to talk to him immediately, whenever he found the courage to do so, Climb lowered his face. It felt as if the pressure would overpower him, of the invisible, thick wall. The old man turned this way and that, and the paths grew darker. Climb followed him from behind without being able to say a word. This was the same as tailing him. Climb felt like pulling out his own hair from what he was doing. No matter how hard it was to speak to him, this wasn't right. Climb tried looking at it from the other perspective as he walked. Eventually, they turned into an alleyway with no one in sight. Climb took several deep breaths and, like a guy confessing to the girl he liked, squeezed out his courage and spoke. "Excuse me." In response to his voice, the old man turned. Both his hair and beard were white, but his upright back reminded Climb of a sword forged in steel. The clear features of his face were lined with wrinkles, and although they made him appear gentle, his eyes were sharp, like a hawk gazing at its prey. He gave off the air of high nobility.
"What is it?"
Although he could somewhat feel the old man's age through his voice, it sounded imposing and was overflowing with life. Feeling an invisible pressure from his eyes, Climb gulped. Climb was pushed back by the old man's energy and could not speak. Then the old man appeared to release the pent-up energy building inside him.
"Who are you?"
His tone became gentle. Climb was finally released from the pressure, and his throat could move normally. "My name is Climb, a soldier of this country. I'm here to give you my sincere thanks for doing what I should have done in my stead." As Climb bowed low, the old man narrowed his eyes as if he were thinking, and muttered a quiet "ah," as if he finally understood what he meant.
"Do not mind it." "Well then."
As the old man tried to end the conversation and walk away, Climb raised his face and asked, Please, wait a moment. Truthfully, though I'm embarrassed to admit it, I followed you. Actually, I don't mind even if you were to laugh at my forward request. But if it's okay with you, could you teach me that technique that you used a little while ago?
What do you mean?
I'm training to become stronger, and wish to learn even a small portion of the incredible movement and technique you showed back there. The old man scanned Climb from top to bottom.
Please, show me both your hands.
Climb held out his hands, and the old man stared at his palms with a perceiving gaze. It felt somewhat awkward. The old man flipped Climb's hands over and scanned his fingernails, then nodded with satisfaction.
They're thick and tough. Good hands for a warrior.
Hearing his words said with a smile, Climb felt his heart grow warm. He felt a joy similar to when Gazef complimented him. No, someone like me is insignificant as a warrior. I do not think that you need to be so humble. May I ask you to show me your sword next? The old man grasped the sword in his hand and stared at the blade with a sharp eye. Aha! Is this your reserve weapon? How did you know? As I thought. Do you see the chip in the blade here? Looking at the place he was pointing to, there indeed was a slight crack in one side of the blade. He must have messed up his slash while training. I'm sorry, that's so embarrassing. The shame made him want to disappear somewhere. Climb knew that he was inexperienced and was very cautious, even nervous, about the state of his weapon, all in an effort to increase his chance of victory even by the slightest amount. But at that moment all he could feel was shame. I see. I have gotten a general sense of your personality. A warrior's hands and weapon are mirrors that reflect the wielder. You are a person who gives off quite an agreeable impression. Right up to his ears, Climb glanced up at the old man. It was a gentle, graceful smile he wore. I understand. I will give you a bit of training. However, as Climb was about to express his thanks, the old man stopped him and continued. However, I have something I would like to ask you. You did say that you are a soldier, correct? Actually, a few days ago I helped a certain lady. Having heard the whole story from the old man who introduced himself as Sebas, Climb felt an intense anger. The fact that someone was abusing the liberation of slaves proclaimed by Renaer in such a way, realizing that even now nothing had changed since then, he could not hide his fury. No, that wasn't it. Climb shook his head. The slave market was banned by the laws of the kingdom. However, even if it wasn't slavery, it wasn't rare to hear about people having to work in poor environments due to debt. There are plenty of byways regarding that law. It was only because those byways existed that the law banning the slave market was able to be passed in the first place. The law Renaer had enacted was almost meaningless. Although that sad thought ran through his mind, he tossed it aside. What he had to think of now was Sebas' situation. Climb furrowed his brow, thinking hard. It was an overwhelmingly disadvantageous position. Although investigating the girl's work contract could allow them to retaliate, it was difficult to imagine that they would leave a weak spot like that in their preparations. If he appealed to the law, Sebas would definitely lose. The reason their opponent did not opt to settle it legally was because they judged that doing it their way would be more profitable. Do you know anyone who could stop this corruption or lend us aid? Climb knew of only one person, his mistress. He could say with confidence that there was no noble who was more pure in heart and could be trusted more than Renaer. However, he could not introduce her. The ones who could do what they did would have various connections with powerful people. Without a doubt, the nobles they were friendly with would have significant authority in the government. If the princess, who was part of the royal faction, used her authority to order an investigation and rescue, and it resulted in hurting the nobility faction, it could lead to a full-scale conflict between the two groups. Exercising power was not easy, especially in cases like the Kingdom, where there was no guarantee that the two large factions getting into a conflict would not lead to a full-blown civil war. Rhaenyra could not cause the collapse of the Kingdom. That was the reason why those topics came up in the discussions with Lycias and her party. That was why Clyme did not say anything. He could not say anything. Interpreting something from Clyme's silence, born from his troubles, Sebas muttered that he understood, and told a shocking truth.
According to the girl, that place had many others besides her, male and female.
Impossible! Despite not being run by the slave trade organization, a brothel like that exists? Or maybe that's the brothel they were talking about.
Clyme spoke.
If it was only to help them escape, I could ask my mistress. She possesses territory of her own, so if they were to seek refuge there...
Is that possible? And the girl could be sheltered as well?
I apologize, Sir Sebas. I can't tell you for certain without asking my mistress, but she is benevolent. I'm sure she would approve it without a doubt.
Huh! If your mistress is that reliable, she must be quite an amazing person indeed.
At Sebas's question, Clyme nodded deeply. No one could be greater, he claimed.
Though this regards a different matter. What happens if there is evidence that the brothel is involved in the slave trade, and thus breaking the law? Would that be covered up as well?
Although that's possible, if the evidence was turned over to the appropriate hands, I want to believe that the Kingdom would not be so corrupt as to ignore it.
I understand. Then allow me to ask you a different question. Why do you wish to be strong?
Eh? At the sudden change in topic, Clyme unwittingly made a strange noise.
A moment ago, you asked me to teach you my technique. Though I determined that you are someone who can be trusted, I wish to know the reason behind why you seek strength.
Clyme narrowed his eyes at Sebas's question. Why did he want to be stronger? Clyme was an abandoned child who did not know the faces of his parents. Stories like his were not uncommon in the Kingdom. Dying in the mud wasn't uncommon either. Clyme's fate had been with those who died in the rain. However, on that day, Clyme met the sun. The existence that had been crawling in the dirt, in the darkness, was captivated by that light. When he was young, he longed for her. As he grew up, his feelings had changed shape without hesitation into love. He had to be rid of these feelings. The miracles that the wandering minstrels sang of would never happen in reality. Like how a man cannot touch the sun, Clyme's wish would never be fulfilled. It must not be fulfilled. The woman Clyme loved, her fate was eventually to be married to another. A princess could not be married to someone of an unknown birth like Clyme, someone who is lower than a commoner. If the king was to die and the first prince succeeded the throne, Rhaenyra would immediately have to marry a high-ranking noble. It was likely that such talks were already underway between the prince and the high nobility. She might even be sent away to a neighboring kingdom as a tool for political marriage. Instead, despite being of a marriageable age, the fact that Rhaenyra did not even have a fiancé, let alone a husband, was what was strange. To Clyme, the current moment in time was like gold. So much so that he would be willing to pay any price to stop time and keep things as they were. If he did not pour all of his time into his training, he could enjoy that moment for a little bit longer. Clyme was a simple, ordinary person with no talent. Even so, at the end of training, he had considerable skill when compared with the other soldiers. Would it not be better to stop his training, so he could serve Rhaenyra by her side for just a little bit longer? However, would that be truly enough? Clyme yearned for the light of the sun. That was not a lie or a misunderstanding. It was a thought born from Clyme's honest truth. However, because I'm a man. Clyme smiled. That was it. Climb wanted to stand by her side. The sun shone brilliantly in the sky. A man could never stand next to it. Even so, he wanted to rise even higher, so that he could become an existence that could be closer to the sun, no matter how marginally. He did not wish to always remain as someone who had to raise his face to see her. These were the insignificant thoughts of a boy, but well suited for a boy nonetheless. He wanted to become a man who would suit the woman he yearned for, even if they could never be together. These thoughts were why he was able to endure the life without comrades, the harsh training, and his studies that cut into his sleep time. If people wanted to call him foolish and mock him, then let them. Those who did not truly love another could never understand his feelings. Sebas narrowed his eyes as he observed the boy's sincerity, as if he was trying to understand the myriad of feelings behind Climb's short answer. He then nodded his head in satisfaction.
I have decided to train you because of your response.
He stopped Climb as he was trying to express his gratitude.
However, I am sorry to say that you have no talent. Training you in earnest will take quite some time that I do not have. I wish to train you so that the results will show quickly, but it will be very severe.
Climb gulped loudly. The glint in Sebas's eyes made his back shudder. The reason he didn't respond immediately was because he felt the power in those eyes. It was a strength that could not possibly exist, one exceeding even that of a serious Gazef.
I will tell you honestly, you may die.
This was no joke. Climb's hunch told him that he was speaking the truth. He didn't care whether or not he died. However, that was only the case if it was for Renaer's sake. He did not want to lose his life over a selfish matter. It wasn't because he was scared. Well, maybe a little. Climb swallowed his saliva once and hesitated. The surroundings were dominated by a brief silence, quiet enough to hear the noises in the distance.
Whether you survive is up to you. If you have something that you hold dear, a reason to crawl forward and cling on to your life, you will survive.
Was he not going to teach him about martial arts? Despite such questions that rose to his mind, that was not the problem at hand. Understanding what Sebas's words meant, he accepted it and gave his reply. I am prepared. I leave myself in your care.
Do you mean that you have the confidence to not die?
Climb shook his head. That wasn't it. It was because, in his heart, Climb always carried with him a reason to cling on to life, even if he had to crawl on the floor for it. Sebas nodded deeply, as if he had read what was in Climb's heart by looking into his eyes.
I understand. Then I will start the training here.
Here?
Yes, it will only take a few minutes. Please raise your weapon.
What was he going to do? With his mind filled with anxiety and confusion over the unknown, and a faint glimmer of expectation and curiosity, Climb drew his sword. The sound of the blade sliding from its sheath rang out through the narrow alleyway. Sebas quietly stared as Climb assumed a middle stance.
Then I will begin. Concentrate.
And in the next moment, with Sebas at the center, it seemed as if blades of ice had shot out in every direction. Climb could no longer speak. A vortex of bloodlust was whirling around with Sebas at the center. Energy that was so dense that its color became visible crashed into him like a raging wave, making his heart feel as if it would explode in an instant. He thought that he heard the sound of a soul screaming as it was being crushed. It sounded as if it was coming from right by his side, a place far away, or perhaps from his own mouth. As he was engulfed by the black stream of bloodlust, Climb felt his consciousness become dyed in white. The fear was so enormous that his mind was letting go of its consciousness in order to ignore the situation.
Is this all that a man amounts to? This is only a warm-up.
In Climb's fading consciousness, Sebas's disappointed voice sounded needlessly loud. The meaning of those words lodged themselves deeply in Climb's mind, deeper than any blade. It was enough to briefly let him forget the fear that was crashing through him from the front. Thump. His heartbeat grew louder. Climb released a large breath of air. His eyes were wet with tears, and despite being so frightened that he wanted to run, he endured it. The hands grasping the sword trembled, and the tip of the blade shook as if he had gone insane. The trembling that ran through his whole body caused his chain shirt to clink loudly. However, Climb gritted his teeth and tried to endure Sebas's bloodlust. Seeing his unsightly appearance, Sebas wore a sneer and slowly formed a fist with his right hand that was right in front of Climb's eyes. After a few blinks, the ball-like fist was completed. Like setting an arrow to a string, the fist was slowly pulled backwards. Even as he stood there trembling, Climb realized what was about to occur and shook his head side to side. Needless to say, his signal did not affect Sebas. Then... die. Like an arrow exploding from the taut string, Sebas's fist flew at him with the sound of it cutting the air. This will be an instant death. Climb realized this as time slowed down. It looked as if an enormous steel ball, even taller than himself, was hurtling towards him at a fierce speed. His mind was filled with the image of this complete, absolute death. Even if he were to raise his sword and use it as a shield, it would be easily shattered by the fist. His body didn't even budge. The enormous anxiety rendered it completely stiff. There was no way to escape the death in front of him. Climb gave in to his fate and at the same time became angry with himself. If he could not give his life for Renaer, why didn't he just die back then? It would have been better for him to die alone, shivering in the cold rain. In his eyes, he saw Renaer's beautiful face. It is said that when people are close to death, they see their lives flash before their eyes. It is the effect of the brain searching the past memories for a way to escape the situation. Still, Climb found it slightly amusing that the last thing he saw was the smile of the mistress whom he loved and respected. Soon after she saved his life, the young Renaer did not show her smile. When had she started smiling? Climb could not remember. However, he did recall seeing her smile shyly. If she knew of Climb's death, would that smile be destroyed, like the dark clouds that block out the sun? Don't make me laugh! Anger surged from the bottom of Climb's heart. She was the one who saved the life that was tossed on the side of the road. If so, his life was not his own. This body was for Renaer, to grant her even the smallest form of happiness. There has to be a way out of this! The chains of his fear were shattered by the manifestation of an intense emotion. His hands moved, his legs moved. The eyes that were about to close shut opened wide. He tried desperately with the naked eye to detect the ultra-high-speed fist heading his way. All of the senses in his body were pushed to the limit, to the point where he could even feel the air's vibrations. Similar to how people display superhuman strength at the scene of a fire, during an emergency, the brain releases the safety placed on the muscles and allows them to display a strength that would otherwise be impossible. The brain secretes chemicals en masse and focuses the mind solely on survival. It quickly processes massive amounts of information and selects the most optimal action. In this single moment, Climb stepped foot into the world of first-rate warriors. However, even there, he was surpassed by the speed of Sebas's attack. It was possible that it was already too late, that there may no longer be any time left to dodge Sebas's fist. Even so, he had to move. How could he just give up? In that rapid compression of time, his own movements appeared to be as slow as a turtle's. Despite this, Climb desperately moved. And... boom! With a roar, Sebas's fist passed by Climb's face. The wind pressure from his strike ripped off a few strands of hair from his head. He heard a quiet voice ring out. "Congratulations. How does it feel to overcome the fear of death?"
Unable to understand what he was saying, Climb wore a stupid expression on his face. How did it feel to face death? And how did it feel to overcome it? Climb panted heavily and stared at Sebas with an absent-minded expression. His face looked as if he had a few screws loose. The bloodlust had disappeared without a trace. It was only after Sebas's words finally entered his head that he could feel a sense of relief. As if all that intense bloodlust was all that had been holding him up, Climb collapsed like a marionette whose strings had been cut. On his hands and knees, he desperately sucked the fresh air into his lungs. It is fortunate that you did not die from shock. There are times when the body so strongly believes that it is dead that it forfeits the ability to sustain life. There was still something bitter left in Climb's throat. This must be what death tastes like, he thought. Repeating this several times will allow you to overcome most fears. But you must be cautious. Fear is what triggers the survival instinct. If it becomes completely paralyzed, then you will be unable to recognize even the most obvious of dangers. You must be able to distinguish between them.
Forgive me if I'm being rude, Sir Sebas. What are you?
What do you mean?
That bloodlust wasn't something that a normal person could give off. Just who...
At the moment, I am simply an old man who is confident in his skills. Climb could not take his eyes off Sebas's smiling face. Although he seemed to be smiling gently, it also looked like a fearsome smile of an overwhelming power greatly surpassing Gazef. This man was an existence that might be stronger than Gazef, who was the strongest warrior in the surrounding countries. Climb decided that his curiosity was satisfied with that. He felt that no good would come from digging any deeper. However, the one thing that burned in his mind was the question of just who this old man named Sebas actually was. He even considered the possibility that he was one of the 13 heroes of the past. Then let us try it once more.
Wait! I have a question!
The frightened voice of a man sounded from behind, cutting off Sebas's words.